Welcome to the Retirement Made Easy podcast, a show created to be your go-to source for straightforward retirement advice. Best of all, it is presented in a language that you can understand. Are you ready for some straight talk on retirement planning without all the fluff? Well, you found the right podcast. Here's your host, certified financial planner, Greg Gonzalez.
And welcome to another episode of the Retirement Made Easy podcast. I'm Greg Gonzalez. Hey, this episode, we wanted to kind of look back at the statistics of all the different podcast episodes, over 160 episodes. And what's really, really neat about our podcast hosting software is we can look at the episodes that had the greatest amount of people downloading it or listening to it. And that kind of tells us what people are most interested in hearing about. And what we can do is we can create, just like this episode is going to kind of be a greatest hits for all the people that don't want to go back and listen to all previous 160 episodes. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take bites and clips from those best episodes, the segments that got more downloads than any other episode. And some of these clips may be from episodes that I recorded 2 years ago or 3 years ago. In fact, it's on a regular basis. People ask me, hey, do you remember that episode where you talked about fill in the blank? And then I think to myself, gosh, that had to be like 2 or 3 years ago. But I wanted to take a minute and I wanted to ask a favor of all the listeners that are tuning in. I am going to include my personal email in the show notes, greg.gonzalez@lpl.com. There will be a link right there in the show notes. And I want you to send me the topic or the question that's on the top of your mind when it comes to retirement planning. What do you want to hear more about? What topic can I go over in a future episode to help you with? And I'm asking for this favor. If you can send me the topic or the question that you want me to cover in the future episode, I will not mention anybody's name. I will keep it totally anonymous. But I want you to help me out as far as future episode topics that can really, really help you out and help other listeners out. So if you'll do me that favor, my email address is right there in the show notes. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. And I will certainly use your questions and topics that you submit as kind of fuel to my fire to keep this podcast going. I've got a couple upcoming episodes that I think you're going to really, really enjoy. And I do have big news on my personal life. I know a lot of listeners are also clients of mine, and we are expecting a little boy this week. So maybe on the next episode, I'll give you an update on our new baby boy and the name we came up with and all that good stuff. I'm really looking forward to giving you that update. All right, let's get into today's episode. This is a compilation of the best segments we've ever had on the Retirement Made Easy podcast, the most downloaded segments. This is a fantastic question. This was submitted from Jenny. For privacy reasons, of course, we don't use people's last names. Even if they include it in their question, we don't include their last name on the podcast. So Jenny submitted this question saying that she's a couple months out from retirement. What are some things that she should be looking at? She's kind of getting uneasy about this decision, but what are 5 things that she should be looking at as she prepares for this retirement date? This is a great question, Jenny. I mean, this is one of the best questions I've received in a long, long time. So of course, if you're working with a retirement planner, you're going to want to go to them and say, hey, I'm a little uneasy here. Let's update my retirement plan and make sure we're not missing anything. The market has really gone wild this last quarter of the year. So probably the figures that you used in the last version of your retirement plan, those will need to be amended. But some things to kind of consider. Of course, so number 1, contact your retirement planner and say, hey, it's time to fine tune and update my retirement plan now that I'm on the doorstep of retirement. Next thing I would be looking at is, okay, health insurance. How's that going to change once you retire? Jenny did not mention that in her question, but maybe her spouse is still working and can cover her for health insurance now that she's not working. Maybe she's 65 and she's eligible for Medicare. Maybe she's going to utilize COBRA, or maybe it's Obamacare. But making sure I understand my health insurance and how that's going to change in retirement, that would be top of mind. Next, I would be looking at whether you're going to get paid out on vacation and sick days. Different employers have different policies. I would also look to kind of fine tune your retirement income game plan for next year, for 2024. Assuming you're going to be retiring in the first part of 2024, well, you're going to want to say, okay, what does my retirement income look like? Is it Social Security? Is it a pension? When are those going to start? If you've got a pension, have you filled out your pension claiming paperwork correctly? Same thing for Social Security. Have you gone onto the website? Have you booked an appointment with Social Security? Will you start drawing retirement income from your retirement nest egg of retirement accounts, Roth IRAs, 401ks, those kinds of accounts that were earmarked to fund your retirement, and come up with a game plan to say, okay, am I going to be taking withdrawals every other week or once a month? What does that look like? And then also on top of that, taxes. What kind of tax withholding are you going to have? Are you just going to pay quarterly estimates on your taxes, or are you going to just withhold taxes from your Social Security, pension income, and IRA or 401k withdrawals? How are taxes going to be accounted for? And next, I could go all day on this, but also I would want to look at, say, okay, my monthly expenses in retirement. Again, I would want to be real clear on what that looks like. Again, fixed expenses versus discretionary expenses like traveling and leisure and that kind of stuff. So redoing your budget might be a very good idea in these months leading up to retirement, because it gives you the confidence that, okay, this is going to work out. So if you've run your numbers correctly, you've got enough money, you've got enough resources to fund your retirement. That just kind of gives you reassurance. And then lastly, looking at the things that might change upon retirement. Are you going to roll over your 401k? And is that going to be managed outside of the 401k platform, or is it going to be left there? What about your emergency fund? Do you have an adequate, what we call bucket number 1, as an emergency fund going into retirement? A lot of people forget about that, but that's something that you would want to look at. So Jenny, very good question. Fantastic question. Thank you for submitting that, and I hope that helps. This article that I was reading that was through MarketWatch just released Social Security's COLA for 2024 is 3.2% versus 2023 was the historic 8.7% inflation-fueled adjustment. So there'll be a link to this in the notes of this episode where you can check it out and read more. But basically what it was saying was, hey, this next year, it's the cost of living for Social Security is going to be 3.2%, just announced yesterday. Last year, it was 8.7%, which is the highest since the early 80s when it was over 9. I believe it was 81 or 82, but 8.7% was last year. And then the year before that was 5.9% in 2022. And the last 20 years, according to the Nonpartisan Senior Citizens League, the last 20 years, the average COLA for Social Security was 2.6%. And people ask me, well, why don't we use 2.6% in our retirement plan? Because as people know, the name of my firm is St. Louis Retirement Advisors. We work with clients in 20 states. And as we're doing these projections and putting together a customized retirement plan, we have to make prudent, logical assumptions. How much is Social Security going to go up over the next 30 years of your retirement? And we don't use 2.6%, which is the average over the past 20 years. And people ask me, why aren't we using 2.6%? And the reason is that Medicare Part B reduces the cost of living adjustment, as we talked about right at the start of this episode, was the 3.2% that you think that you're going to get is actually not a full 3.2% because your cost of Medicare ate into the cost of living adjustment. If your Medicare Part B premium was fixed for life and didn't go up over time, then yeah, we could just use the 2.6% and that might be pretty logical. But again, as I talked about, even in those years like 2009, 2010, 2015, when the cost of living adjustment on your Social Security was 0, your Social Security check actually went down because of the increase in Medicare Part B premium. And believe me, we have clients who were retired at that time. They'll tell you, hey, yeah, their Social Security check actually went down those years, and they were not happy campers. So I think it is logical to expect that to happen in the future. in those years when Social Security says, well, there's no cost of living, there was no inflation this past year. So for our planning, depending on the client, we will use somewhere between a 1% to 2% assumed cost of living for Social Security. The most we would ever do is 2%. Now, this article that I was referencing, and again, you can check it out in the show notes, but this COLA announcement, it says, and I quote, "This COLA announcement comes as Social Security is facing a funding shortage. If no action is taken, the trust fund that supports Social Security will be able to pay full benefits only until 2033, at which point the fund's reserves will become depleted and only able to pay 77% of scheduled benefits." And 2033 sounded like a long way away, like 10 years ago. Well, it's sneaking up on us, and it's 2023 right now. So this is starting in January. It's going to be 9 years away. So there are some big proposals in Congress to modify Social Security and kind of get it turned around, but we'll kind of have to see what they come up with. And a lot of people have asked me, well, do you think it's going to go belly up? And I kind of do a lot of research on this stuff, and SSA.gov is the website. You can really, really read a lot of good stuff. And Social Security knows how many households, American households, really depend on Social Security for that income. So they need to come up with a solution because those households, again, their livelihood depends on that Social Security check. This article goes on to say, and the Social Security Administration found that about half of the senior population lives in households that receive at least 50% of their family income from Social Security benefits, and about a quarter of older households rely on Social Security for at least 90% of their family income. So they know, like Social Security knows, Congress knows, the figures are there that, hey, there are a lot of retired households that need and depend on this Social Security income as the majority of their livelihood. And if 2033, their check is cut literally by 23%, that would really, really be devastating to a lot of those elderly households. One thing that sticks out to me is health insurance in retirement, because it's going to be, for most people, it's going to be different health insurance than when they were working. And what I mean by that is a lot of people will be on Medicare once they turn 65. So what this represents is a change. And a lot of times it's additional cost. Maybe if you're retiring before 65, you'll have private insurance or the Affordable Care Act insurance, or maybe you'll have COBRA, but the costs will be different in those years before you turn 65. So we need to account for that, right? And same thing with Medicare. Once Medicare kicks in at 65, and again, this is for most people. There's some people out there, maybe veterans that have health insurance coverage through TRICARE or something like that, federal government employees, that health insurance available through the federal government. They have terrific health insurance and are not going to be in the Medicare group. So, however, for the vast majority of people that are on Medicare at 65, and then they got to figure out health insurance before 65 if they decide to retire. Again, typically it's private insurance, COBRA, or Affordable Care Act, which the Affordable Care Act, it's kind of income based on the subsidy that you would get. And so that all has to be kind of factored in to your planning. So when we're looking at somebody's retirement plan, one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle is, okay, what about health insurance in retirement? How is this going to be handled? And what are the expenses that we're anticipating here? We need to have some kind of game plan for health insurance and healthcare costs in retirement. And along the same lines, what about long-term care? How are we going to address those potential future costs down the road when we need assisted living or in-home care, that kind of thing? So health insurance and what I'll just call long-term care, those need to be addressed in your retirement plan. Are you going to self-fund the long-term care? Are you going to look at getting a policy? So you've got to have a plan. We've got to have an idea what those health insurance or healthcare costs or long-term care costs are going to be, and then how we're going to pay for them. I'm going to sidestep here 1 second. And someone says, oh, I live on $6,000 a month. So our take home pay is $6,000 a month. So in retirement, if we can just replicate that $6,000 a month from Social Security and our retirement nest egg, we'll be fine. It'll be like we're still working. And the thing that they're forgetting a lot of times are what are going to be the costs that you run into in retirement that you don't have when you're working, and health insurance. Your health insurance comes right out for a lot of people. It's through their paycheck, right? They have group health insurance. And so that their premium for health insurance comes right out first thing with taxes and Social Security, FICA tax, all that kind of stuff. It's already accounted for. Whereas in retirement, if you've got Medicare premiums and all this kind of stuff, well, that is on top of that $6,000 of take-home pay that you're currently living comfortably on. So that's what we tend to do is we tend to stack health insurance and long-term care costs on top of your current living expenses. So again, if your take-home pay is $6,000 a month, well, that doesn't include health insurance, which you'll have as an added expense, and long-term care, it'll be an added expense. Also, a lot of people they want to do a traveling budget. So if, hey, let's say another $1,000 a month to earmark for traveling expenses in retirement, because guess what? In retirement, every day is a Saturday. And if your family, kids, grandkids live out of town, well, guess what? You're probably going to be taking trips to go see them, and traveling's not cheap. And I threw out $1,000 a month. It might be a lot more or a lot less than that. Some people are homebodies. So we've talked about health insurance and long-term care. We've talked about traveling or leisure and how that's going to be different person to person in retirement, what your goals are and objectives. There's other people that have goals of, hey, we want to fund our grandchildren's college education. So that's a separate goal that we need to carve out and say, okay, how are we going to do that? We might say, okay, we're going to put $1,000 a month in a 529 plan for X amount of years. So again, these other goals are going to be on top of your fixed living expenses, health insurance, long-term care, traveling and leisure. And we like to kind of segment these costs so people kind of know, hey, what they're spending their money on and what the plan allows for. And sometimes, like for traveling, for example, I had a lot of clients say to me, and I don't know if it's a book somewhere, but I've heard it on retirement seminars and research that I've done, but they break out the 30 years of retirement they call the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. And what this means is the first 10 years of retirement are your go-go years. You're going to be traveling and spending more and doing more things and experiencing more stuff. And then the next, I guess the middle 10 years of retirement is kind of the slow-go years. You kind of slow down a little bit, more time on the couch. You're still doing, but not like you were in the first 10 years. And then the last 10 years, there's more time on the couch, more trips to the doctor. You're not traveling to Florida as much when you're in your 80s or 90s. Those are what they call the slow go years. And a lot of times when we're building a retirement plan, when somebody's in their late 80s or early 90s, maybe their traveling budget has been reduced and the plan accounts for that, where, hey, they're not spending as much money in traveling expenses like they did in the first 10 years of retirement. So that's very common to do and to look at those costs. Again, health insurance is something you're going to have throughout your retirement. And not only that, one of the biggest pieces of retirement plans is we need to have an inflation. We need to account for the cost of living. So a couple things here that I want to point out, and I've had a lot of phone calls recently that have been really interesting of how people go about getting that income and taking those withdrawals out of their retirement accounts once they're retired. So just conceptually thinking about this, okay, we've got our different retirement accounts. And if you haven't listened to the bucket strategy of retirement planning, go back and check out that episode. But it's bucket number 1 is your emergency fund. Bucket number 2 is your income bucket. Bucket number 3 is long-term growth bucket. And if you've got a Roth and you've got a regular 401k, you've got a brokerage account, depending on your unique situation, your tax status, how much income you need from your retirement accounts, that will all dictate which accounts we put in each bucket. Do we put our brokerage account in bucket number 2, or bucket number 3? What about a Roth IRA? It's going to depend on your situation, so there's no one size fits all. However, talking about bucket number 2, it's the job of bucket number 2 is to provide an income that we can draw on a monthly basis. And how most people do it is if their Social Security check is coming in the first of the month, what they'll do is they'll say, okay, I'll have my income from bucket number 2. I'll have that come in either mid-month or maybe the third week of the month. So then I'm getting 2 paychecks in retirement. And I talked to a guy just last week. He said he went into retirement and he said, okay, I was going to draw money out of my 401k. He just left the money in his 401k and just stayed true to how he was invested. And he just started drawing money out on a monthly basis, didn't really give it a whole lot of thought. And then last year in 2022, because he was drawing money out, plus the market was down, his $1 million turned into $600,000. And that's pretty much where it is today. He's down 40% with the drop in the market, plus what he spent last year. So he's down about $400,000. And this guy was panicked, let me tell you. He said, if I would have known in 1 year I could lose 40% of my money, number one, I wouldn't have retired at the end of 2021 like I did. But now I'm retired. I have $600,000, 40% less than I did a year ago. And I still need that income to live on to supplement my Social Security check. And I don't know what to do. So his fatal mistake was he never planned out the income that he was taking from his 401k. And the other thing he didn't do, he didn't adjust how the investments were positioned in that 401k because his goals were different. In retirement, he was more focused on, hey, getting dividends and interest and income every month out of my 401k. Instead, he left it invested just like he was still working and he was in growth mode. And with the market last year, it really set him back. Because to provide that income, he was actually selling. He was selling his mutual funds in that 401k while they were down significantly and locking in those losses and taking withdrawals to live on every single month. And so for this gentleman, he didn't use the bucket strategy successfully. He didn't even really know about the bucket strategy. And so now he's going to have to redesign his retirement plan like he retired today with $600,000. And guess what? A $600,000 portfolio is going to produce less income than a $1 million investment portfolio. And not only that, his risk appetite didn't match how he was invested in that 401k. Now that he's retired, he didn't really have the appetite for risk now that he wasn't working any longer and saving in that 401k. And so he needed to make some big adjustments there because, again, his goals were totally different. So I can't tell you how many times I see this. Going into retirement with the same mentality and the same growth focus like you were still working, and all it took was 1 year, like last year, the stock market in 2022, and it derailed his retirement completely. So one of the key points that I want to make is before you retire, have a retirement income game plan. Where is your income going to come from once you pull the trigger and retire? I've heard people call that a retirement income roadmap. We want to know how much each retirement income stream is going to be. How frequently are we going to receive that retirement income? Like if it was a Social Security check, that's once a month. And what are the risks of derailing this retirement income? Once we're retired, what could go wrong with our game plan? And I'll give you another example that I'm hearing more and more recently. This was somebody local here in St. Louis that had retired, and her move was, okay, I'll take my 401k. And she met somebody at her local bank, and she said, I'm going to take my entire 401k that was $800,000. And her idea was, I'm going to roll it over to an IRA at the bank and purchase a 6-month CD at 5%, paying me 5%. So her plan was to just live on the money in her savings account. And then whenever the CD matured in 6 months, she would then just cash out the interest from it and replace the money in her savings and then buy another 6-month CD at 5% and then just keep doing so every 6 months. And she could do that for the rest of her life. And she said, well, 5% on $800,000 is $40,000 of interest per year. And she said with her Social Security, that'll be great. That'll be all she ever needs to live on. Not a bad plan, huh? Well, yes and no. So right now, conceptually, that'll work well, right? 5% interest. The first $250,000 has FDIC insurance. Anything over and above that does not, but that is beside the point. But with her plan, let's say in 6 months, she goes to renew her CD, and now the bank is only paying 3.5% interest. Yikes. So the issue here is there's a lot of interest rate risk in her plan, meaning if in 6 months or 12 months or 2 years from now, she can no longer buy a CD that's paying 5% interest, which is probably 2 or 3 or 4 years, that's probably highly likely that interest rates are going to have to go down. Then what does she do? Because she's no longer able to earn that 5% on $800,000, which is $40,000 of interest. If it just dropped to 3.5%, she would only earn $28,000 of interest. And if she's needing that $40,000 of interest to live on, well, guess what? Where's the other $12,000 coming from? She's going to have to dip into her principal. And I don't know how good your memory is, but my memory is pretty good. And I can remember just a couple years ago, if you wanted to buy a 6-month CD, it would pay you like 0.5% or less interest. So her plan really falls apart in that scenario because it's really, really based on the fact that interest rates stay where they are now or go higher. So her plan, I don't have a lot of faith in it. It's working for her right now because interest rates are so high. But in the future, I just feel like she is going to be disappointed in her plan unless interest rates stay as high as they are right now for the next 30 years that she lives. So her plan is too short-sighted. She's just looking at current interest rates now and not seeing the bigger picture. And the last thing that I want to mention, which is one of the most important concepts, is you want to have a tax-efficient retirement income stream. And by that, I mean not paying more taxes than you need to on the money that you're drawing out of your retirement accounts once you're retired. And by paying more taxes than you need to, well, guess what? That just means your money won't last as long because you got money that's going out to Uncle Sam that could have either been prevented or deferred. So when you're planning that retirement income and you're saying, okay, I've got part-time income, I've got pension income, I'm going to delay Social Security, I'm going to take income from my Roth IRA, it needs to all be coordinated in a way that's most tax efficient. And quite frankly, I just see so many people that don't take taxes into account when they're trying to calculate their retirement income. For example, something as simple as people not taking into account how much of their Social Security benefit will be taxed at the federal level. How much should I be saving for retirement? How much should I be putting in the 401k plan or other retirement account like a Roth IRA? Well, if you ask an advisor who's going to follow the Dave Ramsey principles, I would tell you a rule of thumb is 15%. 15% of your household income should be saved for retirement every year. And Dave Ramsey's done a lot of research on this, and that's why he recommends 15%. And as a rule of thumb, I recommend 15%. But for someone that's behind schedule saving for retirement, sometimes it can be more than 15%. But I was curious, and of course, I'm always doing research on my end. I looked up a couple articles. One was called T. Rowe Price Says You Need This Much Saved for Retirement Based on Your Income. And this will be linked in the show notes if you want to read it. So T. Rowe Price, again, this is a huge investment firm and money manager that's well known, like another Vanguard or Fidelity type of company. Well, they did a lot of research, and guess what? They came up with 15%. You should be saving 15% of your income every year for retirement. And in this same article, Fidelity was quoted, and they were included. They did their own study to find that they recommend the ideal savings rate is 15% of your income every year for retirement. What's really, really interesting is this is a rule of thumb, 15%. For some people, it could be more than 15%. And why is that the case? Well, a higher income person, generally speaking, will have a more expensive lifestyle. So let's say someone is used to living on or bringing home, their take-home pay is $15,000 a month, which is a lot of money to a lot of people. Given that the average household is a lot less than that, around $60,000 or so. So when we look at, okay, that $15,000 a month of take-home pay, well, to replace that, you will need a bigger nest egg than someone that wants to live on $5,000 per month. And not only that, but Social Security for a higher income person, the Social Security will make up a lower percentage of that disposable monthly income. And the reason being is because Social Security caps out based on your age. For example, for someone turning 62 in 2023, if they had maxed out their earnings the last 35 or more years, the most they would get from Social Security every month is $2,572. So the difference of the $15,000 a month that they need to live on needs to come from personal savings. Again, we're assuming they don't have a pension. What about for someone that's turning full retirement age in 2023? And we'll also assume that they had the maximum earnings for the last 35 years. Well, the most their Social Security check is going to be, starting in 2023, is $3,627 per month. So again, the difference, where we got over $11,400 a month, has to come from personal savings. And then if you're turning 70 this year in 2023, the most your Social Security benefit would be is $4,555 per month. So with all that being said, if Social Security is going to represent a smaller percentage of the income that they live on in retirement, the higher income people should probably look at saving more than 15%. That was kind of the conclusion that these articles came to. And the final change, I'm kind of switching gears here just for a second, still talking about Social Security, but the change that will be announced in October, it is announced in October of every year. And what I'm talking about is what the cost of living adjustment will be for 2023, which goes into effect in January of 2024. And of course, these are just estimates, but the Senior Citizens League is reporting their estimate based on June figures that the cost of living for Social Security next year will be around 3%, even 2.7%. Now, again, last year it was 8.7%, the highest since 1981 in over 4 decades. So based on what we're seeing here, hey, the cost of living next year for Social Security recipients is not going to be very big. And on top of that, the inflation adjustment for Medicare Part B, the estimates that I'm reading, it's over a 6% jump on that. So the lowest income segment without any kind of IRMA tax right now in 2023, I think it's around $164.90, $165 a month. That's going to go to up about $10 every month. So that's a sizable jump. But of course, we'll just speculate until the end of the year when that is announced for real. I hope everybody has a great week. I'll see you next time. And remember, always dream big. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, please consult your attorney, tax advisor, or financial advisor prior to investing. This is a hypothetical example and is not representative of any specific investment. Your results may vary. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices mentioned are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. The SmartVestor program is a directory of investment professionals. Neither Dave Ramsey nor SmartVestor are affiliates of St. Louis Retirement Advisors or LPL Financial. There is is no guarantee that a diversified portfolio will enhance overall returns or outperform a non-diversified portfolio. Diversification does not protect against market risk. All investing involves risk, including loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA, SIPC.
Thank you for listening to the show today. Check us out at our website, retirementmadeeasypodcast.com. And if you want some help from Greg, submit your questions at the bottom of the page or sign up for a 30-minute retirement coaching session with Greg. We'll see you next week.